Too often, people study PMI's project management body of knowledge, the PMBOK, to take their exam, but then to leave that valuable source of information sitting on their bookshelves. But that is not really the purpose of the PMBOK. Its raison d'être is to use it to your advantage to increase your project success rate. Have you ever wondered how you actually can implement the PMBOK on the field? In this series of videos, I will tell you more about how to bring the project management's PMBOK to life and how I do it on my project with the sole purpose to get successful results. In this video, we will cover how to use PMBOK's knowledge areas. Stay tuned! Hello, project managers and project management professionals. My name is Steven and I'm a certified project management professional with more than 20 years of on-field project experience. The projects I lead are ICT projects, process and business re-engineering projects, as well as construction projects. All of them ranging from small to medium-sized to multi-million euro construction programs, like the terminal building connector at Brussels Airport in Belgium. Most of my projects, not all of them, have been highly successful, keeping them within scope, budget and time with a satisfactory result for my clients. The secret of this success is actually quite simple. I learned to translate the PMBOK into best practices on the field. And that is exactly what I want to share with you. Stick around if you also want to use the PMBOK to your advantage when managing your projects. If you like my videos, give a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe to this channel to be notified when new content becomes available. Stick around until the end of this video. I will show you how you can use the knowledge areas in structuring your project documentation. For now, let's get started with today's topic. How can you use the PMBOK's knowledge areas in your project management? But before getting started, first a small disclaimer. I do not suggest you to use this information and videos for preparing your PMP exam. It might even be confusing and not live up to the expectations the Project Management Institute has towards you. Our purpose is to translate the information comprised in that PMBOK to practical project best practices, not to a theoretical understanding of it. The PMBOK introduces the concept knowledge area early in the guide, more specifically in the 6th edition, in chapter 1, on page 23 to be precise. They use the knowledge areas as a second way, next to the so-called process groups, to structure the way they look at project management processes. They define a knowledge area, and I cite, as an identified area of project management defined by its knowledge requirements and described in terms of its component processes, practices, inputs, outputs, tools and techniques. A mouthful, I would say. PMI actually uses the knowledge areas to define different sub-items of the project management field of study. In a way of speaking, it are the different chapters of a book, Project Management. And these chapters make it easy to explain the subject matter in a structured way. And that's what PMI actually does. Each knowledge area forms a chapter in their PMBOK guide. For practical use, I like to define a knowledge area myself as a container of information that is relevant to my project, or better, my project management activities. Therefore, I can use the knowledge areas to organize my project's documentation and my project control file. So, PMI defines actually 10 knowledge areas. Project scope management, covering all the knowledge on how the scope of a project should be managed. But for me, it is the container where I would store all documentation related to the scope of the project. Just imagine like scope statements, requirement documents, scope change registers, and scope change requests. Project schedule management, it covers the knowledge on how a project schedule should be created and monitored. If you look at the knowledge area as a container of information, then it's clear that I use it to store all planning and schedule related documents, like the schedule itself, including the different tracking versions, but also action registers and other kinds of lists. Third knowledge area is the project cost management, clearly the field of project management that handles all about the project budget and related management activities. For me, it is where I would store all budget-related information and reporting. It's actually the location where a lot of Excel files can be found, budget baselines, actuals versus budget analyses, financial plans, etc. are the typical items, by the way, to be stored here. Project quality management, for PMI the area where quality field of study is explained, for me the location where test plans, test scenarios and scripts, but also the actual test results can be found. Project resource management, the knowledge area that handles how resources, for example human but also other resources like materials, are to be handled. In this project control file location or documentation storage, I would put staffing plans but also staffing requests, but also bill of materials and construction surveys. It is always a good idea to further decompose into subfolders like staffing resources, material resources and equipment resources. Project communications management, well, this is the knowledge area which explains all about how you, as a project manager, should organize your project communications. For me, it is where I store all project-related communications that are specifically created. This folder or document storage location is on all of my projects the largest container, as I do communicate a lot. Therefore, it contains a lot of subfolders. You will find there the project sponsor, the steering committee, the portfolio manager, and so on. These folders might further be subdivided, if needed, with the dates on which the communication is executed. Next to the recurrent stakeholder communication, you also might want to consider topic structure for specific communications or event based on your communication plan. Typical documents that can be found here are management presentations, status reports, and so on. Project risk management, well, the risk management knowledge area is where the PMBOK sorts all information on how to manage uncertainty in a project. I would call it risk and issue management, since a negatively impacted uncertainty or risk, which becomes a reality, actually is an issue. With that said, I need a further decomposition into risks and issues. Typically, documents are a risk register, issue log, problem analysis documentation, and so on. Project procurement management, well, is a knowledge area that could use some further development by PMI, but as it is clearly encompassed in the name, the knowledge area contains all knowledge on how to perform procurements on a project. On my project, it becomes the storage documentation for all procurement-related documents. I highly recommend a subdecomposition into before contract-related information and after contract-related information. RFPs, RFQs are typically belonging to the first folder, whilst contracts, negotiation documents, and communications rather belong to the second folder. Project stakeholder management, while PMI combines all knowledge that you need to know on how to manage project stakeholders in this knowledge area. Interpreted for practical application, I use this knowledge area as follows. Whilst there is a general folder for items like stakeholder lists, stakeholder approaches, documentation, perhaps even stakeholder analysis documents, there is also a specific folder per stakeholder with whom there is an interaction with. I have to admit that this subdivision per stakeholder proves more useful in my mailbox organization than into the project control file organization. PMI also states that knowledge areas are interrelated, therefore they included a 10th knowledge area, being integration management. Integration management is weird to explain, but nevertheless a very important knowledge area. In first instance, all knowledge areas are interrelated. Think, for example, of scope changes. Define scope changes requires knowledge from the scope management area, but also because of the impact on time and cost from the schedule and the cost management knowledge areas. But you need to communicate about the scope change, and there might be risks involved, etc., etc. But, and perhaps even more important, there is the integration of the project with the performing organization. For example, you need to obtain resources from that organization. The project needs to be approved and mandated by that organization. And at one moment in time, you need to deliver the project product or result to that organization. Therefore, all documentation like the project mandate, financial business case, the go-live documentation, approval documents, decision registers, well, they find a place under this storage location on my projects. Stick around before we get into a demonstration and some last tips. But if you like this video, please give a thumbs up. It will motivate me to share more practical project management knowledge with you. If you want to be notified when a new video becomes available, do not hesitate to hit the subscribe button. And if you have a specific question on this topic or a suggestion for another topic or video, leave me a comment below. Now, as promised, let me show you how my documentation structure looks like. For demonstration purposes, I will make use of the Windows Explorer, but the principle can be translated to any other documentation system that allows some kind of structuring. For example, if you would use Microsoft SharePoint or Microsoft Teams, you can use respectively the columns or the channel functionalities. So now for the demo. You can see that I would have a project folders in which I would have my different projects nominated. I use the project name for that, but it can be a client name as well at the moment you work for clients or external clients. Now, if you take a look at the structure, then you would see that if I go into one project, in this case I take project X linear, I will have two folders or two channels if you work with Microsoft Teams, or two columns if you work with Microsoft SharePoint. But these two are all documentation related to project management and all documentation related to the subject matter, the content of the project. You can have as well, for the other project, I use exactly the same project management and subject matter. If I would go into the subject matter, so that's all the documentation which relates to the project product. It might be the design documents, for example. It might be kind of testing documents if I'm not incorporating it in my project management documentation. I would structure that kind of subject matter into the linear project lifecycle. So what are all the documents created in the startup phase? What are all documents created in the conceptualization phase? What are all documents created in the realization, the handover, and the closure phase? For an agile approach, I would rather go for the subject matter into a structuration of sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4. So which documents are created in which sprint. You might want to consider here as well the minimum viable products as a way to structure your documentation. If we go then to the project management, well, the project management structure and for the agile project is quite the same. The project management documentation, I will organize that, making use actually of the knowledge areas of PMI. The first knowledge area to be used is integration management. And in the integration management, there you would find for me the project mandate, the business case, and all this kind of documentation that is needed. Also, for example, the transfer of responsibilities document or eventually the punch list if existing. You have the scope management as well. Well, there you will find all documentation like the scope management plan, but also the scope statement, the statement of work, the work breakdown structures, and all that kind of documentation. You might want, if you don't have a separate folder for the subject matter, you might want to further decompose the scope management as well with the project lifecycles and put in there all the documentation related to the project product. Equally valid for the quality management. In the quality management, you might want to organize that as well into the phases of the project. However, for quality management, I would rather use a structuration based on the testing model that I will use. In linear approaches, we often use the V model, and the V model, you will have the different tests and test documentation like the scenarios and the scripts. In schedule management, obviously you will find everything about the schedule of the project, the Gantt charts, for example, but at the same time, you will find in there as well the action lists. The cost management will contain all documentation related to the budget. It's a lot of Excel files where you make the S-curves, the earned value analysis. If you do that, you will all find that in the cost management knowledge area or the cost management folder in this case. The resources management, you need to decompose that in 3 different subfolders, being everything around the staffing, the human resources, everything about the materials, what you buy, for example, survey statements you will find in there, and the equipment, like every documentation, certificates, especially on the equipment you use, like for your cranes, your scaffolds, etc. Communications management is the biggest folder, and it exists, or it starts with 2 different folders, being the recurring communication and the specific communication. For the recurring communication, what you often find is the project sponsor, the steering group, the portfolio management. So I would use the fora to which I do the regular communication, and each of them are further than decomposed. In this case, because I do a weekly communication and a weekly meeting with my project sponsor, I use the weeks, the week number of the year. You can do for the steering group the months if you report once a month to the steering group, and obviously you can use dates. You can use recurring dates if that would be more convenient for you as well. Specific communications are then really like a kickoff, like roadshows, like all these one-time bigger communications that you might want to include in your project documentation. I like to use as well a date in there for later references. The risk and issue management, well, I decompose that in risks and opportunities. So it's actually managing the uncertainty of my project, and I use issues. Risks, once they occurred, they become issues, and you might want to follow them up separately. For example, an issue log or issue register is what you find here. A risk log and a risk register is what you will find here. Procurement, well, there you have the procurement documentation and the contractual documents. Procurement, as long as the contract is not concluded, what I like to use there is the subject, the procurement subject. What are you actually buying? You might be buying windows for a house, you might be buying doors, you might be buying whatever subject it is. For each of them, you might find RFI documentation, request for information, the request for proposal and request for quotation are placed in here, sometimes subdivided by the potential suppliers. You have all your documentation related to the negotiations, and obviously the decision documents are posted in here as well. And once there is a decision on who will be the party actually to make a contract with, you go to contract management, and there you see you would have then suppliers, actually the contracted suppliers, as the first subfolder, and in there you should have something about contract claims, contract communications that you do, and contract documentation. Last but not least, the stakeholder management. Well, you have a general folder in which you do your stakeholder planning documents. You will consider the stakeholder lists, the more general documentation, but you might want to foresee as well one folder per stakeholder that you have an interaction or a communication with. Not always necessary, not for all stakeholders involved, but especially for the important ones, you might want to follow that up with a separate folder. So, that for the demo. Let's go back to the video. So, to conclude, some additional tips. 1. Make sure to always consider a distinction between project management and subject matter related documentation. Structuring the subject matter documentation can be done, for example, making use of the project management lifecycle, in which phase is which document created, or per subject matter specific topic. Second tip, you can choose to incorporate subject matter documents as the highest level or as part of the knowledge areas. Most relevant areas are scope and quality. Third tip, always explain your documentation structure to team members and stakeholders that make use of your documentation folders and systems. Fourth, use this knowledge area structuring also to organize your project folder in your mailbox. Actually, my mailbox project folder is a one-on-one copy of my project control file structure. Your physical documentation, if still existing, can be organized likewise. For example, one binder or one closed section per knowledge area. Sixth tip, you need to keep in mind security and accessibility when setting up your project control file, especially when you work with external parties. Some information like budget, procurement decisions, and other things are not to be shared with all project stakeholders. Use the knowledge areas as well to structure your project management plan. Each chapter of my overall project management plan is organized per knowledge area, but that is probably a topic for another video. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you back in one of my other videos.